The night was supposed to be perfect. The kind of night that reminded me why I had spent my whole life in this business. The air was thick with the kind of Hollywood magic you could almost taste. Limos pulling up, cameras flashing, the hum of 1,000 conversations, all buzzing with the same electric excitement. And me? I was ready. I step out of the car, straightening my tux. People call my name, reporters shouting questions I didn't have time to answer. I gave a few nods, a wave here and there, but my eyes were locked on the entrance. The golden doors of the Dolby Theater. The same doors I had walked through so many times before. But tonight was different. I reached the front, pulling my invitation from my pocket. The security guard looked at me, then at the paper in my hand. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe hesitation, maybe regret. Then he took a step forward, blocking my way. "Mr. Niro, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." I chuckled, shaking my head. "That's funny. Good one." The guy didn't laugh. "I'm serious, sir. You can't go in." Everything around me slowed. I felt the weight of the cameras turning toward us, the murmurs starting to spread through the crowd. I glanced behind me, catching Jerry's eye. He was already pushing through the sea of people, moving fast. "What do you mean I can't go in?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. The guard shifted his stance. "I'm just following orders." "Whose orders?" But before he could answer, Jerry was at my side. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Bob, let's talk over here." I let him pull me a few steps away, but my eyes never left the entrance. Something wasn't right. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice low. Jerry licked his lips. He looked nervous, more nervous than I'd seen him in a long time. "They revoked your invite." I laughed again, but this time it felt hollow. "Revoked my invite? That's not how this works. They can't just." "They did." His voice was firm, but underneath it, I heard something else. Fear. I stared at him. "Why?" Jerry exhaled, rubbing his hand over his face. "I don't know. They're saying it was a last-minute decision." That's all I got. That didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. I looked back at the entrance, at the faces moving in and out. People I knew. People I had worked with, laughed with, shared tables with at events just like this. And then I saw him, standing off to the side, away from the cameras, away from the chaos. Martin Scorsese. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anything, really. Just standing there, his hands in his pockets, his head tilted slightly like he was thinking. Or maybe pretending not to notice what was happening right in front of him. Something inside me twisted. Marty was my guy, my director, my friend. If anyone knew what was going on, it was him. I started walking. Jerry grabbed my arm again, but I shook him off. "I need to talk to him." Jerry hesitated, then sighed. "Just keep your voice down, all right?" I didn't answer. I was already closing the distance. "Marty," I called, keeping my tone casual. He finally looked up. His face was unreadable, but his eyes darted past me, like he was checking to see who was watching. "Bob." I stopped in front of him. "Tell me what's going on." Marty hesitated, then shifted his weight. "I don't know all the details. But you know something." He glanced toward the entrance, then back at me. "This isn't the place to talk about it." I clenched my jaw. "Then where is?" He exhaled through his nose, looking past me again. I turned slightly, following his gaze. A few feet away, a woman in a sleek black dress stood near the ropes, her eyes fixed on us. I didn't recognize her, but the way she watched, like she was waiting for something, sent a chill through me. Marty leaned in slightly. "Bob, listen to me. Go home." I stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I am." His voice was low, urgent. "Go home. This isn't a fight you want to have tonight." I felt something rise in my chest. Anger, confusion, maybe both. But before I could say anything, he stepped back. "I gotta go," he said, already turning away. I reached for his arm, but he slipped into the crowd before I could stop him. I stood there, watching him disappear into the lights and the noise. And that's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some clerical error, some mix-up with invitations. Someone didn't want me here, and they had made damn sure I wouldn't get in. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, my mind racing. The flashes from the cameras felt like tiny explosions, the noise around me fading in and out like a bad signal. People kept walking past, slipping into the theater like nothing was wrong. Like I wasn't standing here, locked down my own damn world. Jerry was still beside me, shifting on his feet. "Bob," he said quietly, "we should go." "Go?" Just like that? After everything I'd put into this business? After everything I'd done? I turned to him. "No, I need answers." Jerry hesitated. "Bob, come on. Let's get out of here. We'll figure out later." Later? There was no later. It was happening now. I shook my head and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but my body moved on instinct, pushing through the crowd. People looked at me, whispering, some pretending not to notice while stealing glances. The air felt different now. Heavier. I needed to get off the main floor. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere I could think. Then I spotted a hallway, tucked off to the side. A few crew members were moving in and out, carrying clipboards, earpieces in. It wasn't the kind of place guests were supposed to go, but I wasn't just a guest, was I? I headed toward it, Jerry right behind me. "Bob, what are you doing?" "I'm getting answers," I muttered. I slipped past the velvet rope, moving fast before anyone could stop me. The hallway was narrow, lined with framed photos from past Oscar nights. Moments frozen in time. Actors laughing, directors holding up their statues, history being made. And now I wasn't even allowed inside. I pushed forward, rounding a corner. That's when I saw him. Al Pacino. He was standing near a doorway, talking to a guy in a suit. His expression was tense, his hands moving as he spoke. He hadn't seen me yet. Jerry grabbed my arm. "Bob, don't." I shrugged him off and kept walking. I looked up just as I reached him. His face changed. A flicker of something, guilt, maybe, before he masked it. "Bob," he said, like he wasn't surprised to see me. Like he knew I'd find him. I stopped right in front of him. "Tell me what's going on." I let out a slow breath, glancing at the guy beside him. The man took the hint and stepped away, disappearing through the doorway. "Bob," I said again. "Not here." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, here's fine. Here's great." He shifted his weight. "Look, don't lie to me." I cut in. "Did you know?" I was quiet for a second. "Bob, did you know?" I repeated. His eyes flickered, and that was all the answer I needed. I stepped back, shaking my head. My chest felt tight. "Jesus, Al. It's not what you think," he said quickly. "Oh, it's not?" "Because what I think is that I just got shut out of the biggest night in Hollywood, and somehow you're standing here like nothing happened." Al sighed, running a hand through his hair. I didn't have a choice. I stared at him. A choice. He looked away, jaw clenched. "They came to me a few days ago. Said it was either you or me." The words hit like a punch. "What?" Al exhaled. "They told me if I didn't go along with it, I'd be next." I blinked. Go along with what? But before he could answer, there was movement behind me. I turned just as two security guys appeared at the end of the hallway. One of them pointed. "Mr. Niro, you need to leave. Now." I looked back at Al, waiting, hoping. Say something. But he just stood there. The guards moved in, their footsteps heavy against the floor. I held Al's gaze until the last second, then turned and walked away before they could touch me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay here. I stepped out on a Hollywood boulevard, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The noise of the city felt distant, like I was hearing it from underwater. People were everywhere. Tourists taking pictures, street performers doing their acts, couples laughing as they passed by. But me? I just stood there, locked out of a world I'd spent my whole life in. Jerry was a few steps behind, silent. He hadn't said much since we left. Probably didn't know what to say. I pulled out my phone, my hands tighter around it than they needed to be. There had to be something online by now. A headline. A rumor. Something explaining why I had just been turned away from the Oscars like some nobody off the street. I tapped the screen, scrolling fast. Nothing. I frowned, refreshing again. Still nothing. No tweets. No breaking news. Not even a whisper. That didn't make sense. This was the Oscars. A place where even the smallest mistake got plastered all over the internet in seconds. And yet, somehow, me getting denied entry wasn't making a sound. My chest tightened. Someone was controlling this. I turned to Jerry. "You talked to anyone yet?" He shifted, glancing around. "I made a few calls." And he hesitated. "Jerry," I pressed. "What aren't you telling me?" He exhaled. "I don't know how to say this, Bob. Nobody wants to talk." I stared at him. "What?" Every call I made went nowhere. Either they don't pick up, or they act like they don't know anything. I shook my head. That wasn't normal. People in this town talked. It was all they did, especially when something big happened. And then I remembered AL's words. They told me if I didn't go along with it, I'd be next. Go along with what? Who were they? And why was everyone so damn afraid to even acknowledge what had just happened? A bad feeling crept up my spine. I looked at Jerry. Who pulled the strings? Jerry hesitated again, then glanced around before lowering his voice. It was Pacino. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer. Say that again. Jerry licked his lips. I didn't want to tell you, Bob. I really didn't. But I got confirmation. The decision came from Al. No. No way. Not Al. Not after everything. I felt a rush of heat in my face. That doesn't make sense. I know. Jerry looked pained. But it's what I was told. I turned away, hands on my hips, staring at the pavement. Al wouldn't do this to me. He wouldn't. Unless he had a reason. I thought back to the way he had looked at me inside. The hesitation. The guilt. Like he wanted to tell me something, but couldn't. What had they said to him? What had they threatened him with? I clenched my jaw. There was only one way to find out. I was going to find Al. And this time, he was going to give me the truth. I wasn't going home. Not yet. Not until I saw Al. I moved fast, cutting through the streets, barely hearing Jerry calling after me. My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't know if it was anger or adrenaline, but my hands were clenched in a fist, my jaw tight. I needed to see his face when I asked him. Needed to look him in the eye when I said his name. The theater was behind me now, the flashing lights, the cameras, the glitz. I knew where Al would be, somewhere away from all of it, somewhere he could breathe. He never liked being in the middle of the crowd. He'd show up, smile, do what needed to be done, then slip away before the night was even over. And I was right. I spotted him outside a side entrance, standing under the glow of a street lamp, his hands in his pockets. He was alone. I didn't slow down. His head lifted as I got closer. He must have seen something in my face, because he didn't say my name like he did earlier. He just let out a long breath. I stopped right in front of him. You did this, I said. He didn't answer right away. Say something, I demanded. Al looked at me, his face unreadable. I didn't want to. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, you didn't want to? That's good. That makes it better. He ran a hand through his hair, looking away for a second. When he looked back, there was something tired in his eyes. They gave me a choice, Bob. I stepped closer. Who? Al didn't answer. Who, Al? I pressed. He exhaled through his nose, shifting his stance. The studio. The academy. People higher up than you and me. My stomach twisted. What did they say? He hesitated, then finally spoke. They told me, if I didn't go along with it, they'd bury me too. Bury him, just like they were trying to do to me. I shook my head. That's not good enough. Al frowned. What do you mean? I don't believe you. His jaw tightened. I pointed at him. You could have fought back. You could have told me. But instead, you stood there and watched it happen. Al took a step forward now, his voice lower. You think I had a choice? Yes, I snapped. You did. His eyes flashed. You don't know what they threatened me with. I held his gaze. Then, tell me. Al hesitated, just for a second, and that was all I needed. He was still hiding something. Before I could say anything else, there was movement behind me. Heavy footsteps. I turned just as two security guards stepped out from the shadows. Mr. Niro, one of them said. You need to leave. I looked back at Al. He wasn't saying anything. Wasn't stopping them. Wasn't even looking at me anymore. I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned away. I didn't have a full truth. Not yet. But I was going to find it. No matter what. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Not with everything spinning in my head. Not with the feeling in my gut telling me this wasn't over. I was lying. Maybe not about everything, but enough. He was scared. More scared than I had ever seen him. And when a guy like Al Pacino is scared, it means something real is happening behind the scenes. Something big. But who was pulling the strings? I needed to find out. Jerry had been trailing behind me since I walked away from Al, his face full of worry. Bob, listen to me. Maybe we let this go for tonight, huh? I ignored him. Who have you called? Jerry hesitated. What? You said you made calls. Who picked up? He rubbed the back of his neck. A few old friends. But Bob, no one wants to talk. That wasn't good enough. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through my contacts. There was one guy, Someone who had been in this business long enough to know the game inside and out. Someone who always had information. I hit the call button. It rang twice. Then a voice came through. Bob, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I stopped walking. You know what happened? A small chuckle. Of course I do. I tightened my grip on the phone. Then tell me. There was a pause. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, not over the phone. That was all I needed to hear. Where? I asked. A pause. Then he gave me an address. I hung up. Jerry was looking at me. Who was that? Someone who actually knows what's going on. Jerry sighed. Bob. But I was already moving. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the back booth of a small restaurant. The kind of place that looked closed even when it wasn't. Dim lights, a bartender who didn't ask questions, a few guys scattered at tables, talking in hushed voices. And across from me, Richard Lyons. He wasn't famous, but he had been around forever. A Hollywood fixer. The kind of guy who knew all the secrets before they even became rumors. He stirred his drink, watching me. You look pissed. I leaned forward. I just got locked out of the Oscars. My invite got pulled, my so-called friends are too scared to talk, and Al Pacino is lying to my face. Yeah, I'm pissed. Richard took a sip, then set his glass down. You're asking the wrong questions. I frowned. What does that mean? He looked at me for a long moment. Then, he leaned in, lowering his voice. Bob, do you know how powerful the Academy really is? I narrowed my eyes. What are you saying? He exhaled. It wasn't Al. My stomach tightened. I stayed quiet. Let him keep talking. This came from higher up, he continued. Way higher. The people who actually control things in this town. The ones who decide which movies get made. Who wins? Who loses? And sometimes, he gave me a pointed look, who disappears. A chill ran through me. I kept my voice even. Why me? Richard hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and slid something across the table. A folded piece of paper. I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a contract. My name was on it. My signature. Except, I had never seen it before in my life. I looked up. What the hell is this? Richard watched me carefully. It's the reason they want you gone. I scanned the page. It looked like a deal I had supposedly signed. A deal that, if real, would tie me into a project I knew nothing about. A project backed by people I didn't want to be involved with. And, at the bottom, a name I hadn't expected. A name bigger than Al Pacino. A name that made everything suddenly click. I swallowed hard. You're telling me he's behind this? Richard nodded. And trust me, Bob, he's just getting started. I stared at the name on the contract, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't some executive I had pissed off. This wasn't Al making a bad call. This was bigger. Way bigger. Richard watched me from across the table, his face calm like he had just dropped a piece of everyday gossip. But this wasn't gossip. This was a setup. I took a slow breath. You're telling me he did this? Richard nodded. Not just him, but he's the face of it. The one making sure you don't step back into the light. I clenched my jaw. Why? Richard leaned back, studying me. Because you're in the way. In the way of what? I looked down at the contract again. My name. My signature. A deal I never signed. A project I never agreed to. And then it hit me. This wasn't about punishing me. This was about control. If they could forge my name on a deal, they could make it look like I had agreed to anything. They could twist my reputation, my career, my entire legacy into something I had no say in. And if I pushed back, they'd erase me. I exhaled through my nose, feeling something shift inside me. They wanted me out of the picture, but they had made one mistake. I wasn't going anywhere. I folded the contract and slid it into my pocket. Where is he? Richard smirked. You already know. I did. There was only one place a man like that would be on Oscar night. I stood up. Jerry, who had been sitting quietly this whole time, tensed. Bob, what are you thinking? I looked at him. I'm thinking I want my life back. Jerry glanced at Richard, then back at me. This isn't a fight you can win. I shook my head. You're wrong. I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I wasn't running anymore. I was going straight to him, and I was going to make him face me. I stepped out into the night, my hands clenched so tight I could feel my nails pressing into my palms. The streets were still alive with the glow of Hollywood. The after parties, the flashing lights, the cameras searching for their next shot. But I wasn't looking at any of that. I was only thinking about him. The man who had tried to erase me. The man who had put his name on a deal I never signed. The man who thought he could control me. I knew exactly where he'd be. I walked fast, Jerry struggling to keep up behind me. "Bob, listen to me," he said. "Just stop for a second." I didn't stop. "I get it," he went on. "You're angry. You have every right to be. But if you go charging in there without thinking, you're going to make it worse." I finally slowed, just enough to turn and look at him. "Worse." I let out a short laugh. "Jerry, they already took everything. What else can they do?" Jerry hesitated, and for the first time all night, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear for me. I softened. "You don't have to come." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You know I'm not leaving you." I gave him a small nod. Then I turned back toward the hotel. The one place I knew the man responsible would be. The lobby was packed. Celebrities, executives, people clinking glasses and smiling like they weren't all part of the same machine. The same game. But I wasn't playing anymore. I moved through the crowd, ignoring the murmurs, the looks, the whispers of people recognizing me. My eyes were locked on one man. The man standing near the bar, laughing, surrounded by power. William Carter, a producer, a mogul, a man who had been pulling strings in this town longer than most people had been alive, and a man who had made sure I was locked out of the Oscars. I walked right up to him. The laughter in the group faded as people saw me. William turned, still holding his drink, eyebrows raising in mock surprise. "Robert," he said smoothly, "didn't expect to see you here." I kept my voice steady. "I'll bet." He smirked. "Something on your mind?" I pulled the contract from my pocket and held it up. His eyes flicked to it. Then slowly his smile widened. "Where did you get that?" "You know where." He took a sip of his drink. And I stepped closer. "You forged my name. You locked me out of my own industry. You turned my friends against me. You think I'm just going to let that go?" William tilted his head, amused. "And what exactly do you plan to do about it, Bob?" I stared at him. Then I said, "I already did it." His smirk faded just slightly. I kept my voice low. "You spend your whole life making sure guys like me play by your rules. But here's the thing, William, I don't work for you. And I never will." His expression hardened. "Careful." I leaned in. "No, you be careful." Then I stepped back, turned, and walked away. Because what he didn't know, what he hadn't even realized yet, was that I had just given Richard Lyons everything. The contract, the proof, the whole damn story. And by morning, the world was going to know exactly what kind of man William Carter really was. I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. Calls, texts, headlines flooding in before the sun had even fully risen. I already knew what they were about. I picked up the remote and turned on the TV. Every channel was covering it. The biggest Hollywood story in years. William Carter exposed. His connections, his deals, the way he controlled careers with the stroke of a pen. The contract with my forged signature was just the start. Richard had dug deeper, found more. Emails, phone calls, bank records. Proof that William had been pulling the strings on more than just me. Actors, directors, writers, careers built and destroyed under his thumb. And now, it was all unraveling. I exhaled, rubbing my jaw. I should have felt relieved, maybe even satisfied, but something was still gnawing at me. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Found a name I hadn't called in years. Then, before I could think twice, I hit dial. It rang. Once. Twice. Then, Bob. His voice was tired, rough, like he had barely slept. I hesitated. "Al." A pause. "Then, you saw the news." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah." Another pause. Then, Al sighed. "I tried to warn you." I frowned. "No, you didn't." "I did," he said, quieter now. "Not the way I should have. But I did." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said, "I need to know something." Al didn't answer. I pressed on. "Did you know everything? The contracts, the setups, all of it?" A long silence. Then, finally, "I knew enough." I clenched my jaw. "And you still stood by him." His voice was barely a whisper now. "I was scared, Bob." I closed my eyes. I want to be angry. Maybe I still was. But I understood. Hollywood was built on power, and William Carter had all of it. Until now. I let out a breath. "It's over, Al." "I know." Another silence. Then Al cleared his throat. So what now? I looked out the window, watching the city wake up. The same city that had tried to shut me out. I thought about the years I had given to this business. The films, the friendships, the moments that had made it all worth it. And I realized something. I wasn't done. Not even close. I leaned back, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Now, I said, now I get back to work. Thank you for listening to another exciting story from VIP Vault. If you have enjoyed listening to this story, check out our videos here.